Ladies and gentlemen, whether you like it or not, Magnus Carlsen is currently the best chess player on Earth. But why? How? You ever wonder that? Like, what exactly separates him from all of the players in the top 10, top 15? A long time ago, I made a video called How Magnus Carlsen Crushes Chess Masters, but I really meant like 25, 24, 2300. You know, people maybe my level, international master. Like, what's the difference between him and those people? But in this video, I'm analyzing the games that Magnus just played in Zagreb, Croatia, in the first day of the Blitz tournament of the Super Bet, or the Super United Rapid and Blitz. And I thought that this video was really interesting because it showed all the different elements of his game in his victories. He won 7 out of 9 Blitz games. He had a day of only decisive games. And I'm going to go through the 7 games. I'm going to try to, go through them relatively quickly, so bear with me. The first game that he played was against Jordan van Forest, right? And one thing about Magnus is that he will always try to steer games, if possible, to territories that are off the main line and still practically decent and where you have to do battle. And so first we have an anti-Berlin, right? Magnus played the anti-Berlin, and he plays a really obscure setup already with the move queen to e2. Like, very, very few games here, and, from a position that's been reached thousands of times, just give it a couple more moves, and this entire approach by White has almost never been attempted. In fact, literally, this position has only been reached one time in practical play, and it was like in 2007. And he goes for opposite side castling, or rather, he goes for long castle, inviting short castle by Jordan, but Jordan chooses to castle on the same side. So one thing about Magnus, like from the practicality standpoint, is he's very, very good at gauging opponents' resources in positions and baiting them into certain situations. So you'll notice that Jordan's kind of keeping it still. Magnus transfers his knight to the c4 square, and at some point, Magnus will try to expand on this side of the board to complement his bishop. He's also doing a very nice job coordinating a set of forces against that bishop, and this bishop doesn't really scare anybody. So Magnus plays h4, builds up a little structure over there, and Jordan tries to get aggressive, right? Now, Magnus is the type of guy who, when he sees an initiative coming, if he evaluates it in such a way that actually that initiative for his opponent is only going to cause them problems, he will let them do it. Like, you notice Magnus is kind of playing possum here, right? He's sort of allowing it to happen. And the second that Jordan takes one step back, here comes this dynamite move f4. ef4, gf4. This knight is still kind of lurking. This is a menace potentially. You got a little bit of pressure here. But Jordan tries to fight back against the expansion on this side of the board. Now, immediately Magnus boots the knight, okay? He boots the knight, and as Jordan has split his pawns and allowed some potential tactics, one thing about Magnus is he is a cold-blooded calculator. Like, if he has enough time in a position, he will execute perfectly. Right now, it looks like there is nowhere useful to move this knight. For example, like what he does in the game, knight to g4, there's an attack on the queen, but the queen could potentially move, right? For example, like, I don't know, let's just say to g6. But the problem with that is that Magnus will get an unstoppable outpost on the e5 square, pressuring everything in the black position. And instead of that, we have hg and something like this. Now, the game is not over. Jordan sacrifices the queen for the rook and the bishop, but the thing about playing against a queen, when a queen and a few pieces are playing against like a rook, a knight, or a rook and a bishop and a handful of other pieces, you need kind of a joker card, you need kind of a wild card, and Magnus has that, which is his h-pawn. And he's able to use that h-pawn as a permanent decoy for the opponent to deal with, and like I said, he doesn't need a second invitation to the party. Knight to d7 check. We have rook seeing, knight seeing the bishop. That's why you can't take this. And when you fight against a set of pieces and you have a queen on the board, simplifying is good, right? Because not simplifying everything, but simplifying enough. The less pieces they have, the better. And that h-pawn is the joker card, right? And look at this beautiful move. Not this one. This one's just very simple. You're threatening mate in one. But this nice move, bishop g7, using the pawn as a shield, defending the bishop. I guess maybe the bishop is the shield in this case, but you're just trying to go h7, h8, and Magnus wins it in style. And a long time ago, he And the game went like 2 more moves. Nice little finish here. You can take it, but then I'm going to take with check and win this, and Jordan resigned. Taking opponents on a different theoretical journey than they're used to and making them play an interesting and imbalanced game of chess where somehow, despite both sides having play and opportunities, only Magnus created something. Very nice coordination of his pieces. He puts all the pieces on all the right squares, makes a very well-timed break f4, and he just never looked back. He just honestly makes it look easy. Like almost none of Jordan's pawns were able to move in this game. In the next round, Magnus had the black pieces against Topalov. Now, this game is a totally different story. So first of all, we have another e4, e5, but this one is in Italian. Here comes the opening wrinkle. Everybody, including your parents, your grandparents, and your dog and cat, play the move bishop c5 in this position. I mean, it's in Italian. You might as well play bishop c5, right? That's kind of what, right? That's what you're supposed to do. No, Magnus plays a little bit more passively. Okay, so now white will not play c3, d4. White will not play b4, a5. So there's the little opening wrinkle, right? And Magnus, I told you a long time ago, very good at baiting things out of his opponent. So he plays the move knight e7. So if white does nothing, let's just give white the move rook b1. Magnus wants to play c6, d5, maybe knight g6. He knows that when he sidesteps back with the knight, Topalov will come forward with d4. Okay, beautiful. Now we have our little positional transformation. I'm going right back to c6. You remove my 2 plans, right? So now I'm going to try to get your bishop. Topalov lunges forward, and yes, according to the engine, this is very, very reasonable. We have a giant exchange of pieces, and the following position, where the engine gives white a very healthy plus 0.7. That is no joke. Now, where does that advantage come from? Well, king safety is about equal here. Material is equal, so why is white so much better? Well, black just has one major weakness. If you look at the structure, it's 2 now, 2, but 1 is connected. This pawn's just standing on its own. The quality of the knights, I guess, is higher than the quality of these 2 pieces, but really the game is determined by this. So how is Magnus going to win this game? I mean, you know that already, right? I don't have to spoil it for you, but what is it? Okay, well, Topalov plays knight c4 and knight a5, okay? So the knight is trying to go to attack this pawn. Now, Magnus is very good at evaluating true threats and true plans, right? He's like, oh, you want my pawn and you want to go to a5. All right, so do it then. So do it, come on, hit me, do it. And Topalov's like, geez, bro, relax, we're at a chess tournament. It ain't like that, right? So the plan continues now with knight a5. Now there's 2 pawns hanging. What on earth does Magnus want here? I mean, he's just going to lose material. Sometimes good defense, better offense, in the words of Mark Jackson. Rook d2. All right, he is fighting against the weaknesses with a counterattack. And Topalov plays the move rook e2. So now we have a little bit of a simplification. Now, again, you have a weakness here. Probably Magnus will go b6, inviting the knight in for t, and now you cannot play rook to d8. No, rook d8, seizing the only open file, b7 is now still able to be captured. Topalov plays king f1, anticipating rook d2, where he will go here and then kick the rook out, okay? But Magnus is like, nah, dude, be careful what you wish for. Rook d5. Now if you take on b7, the knight has no way out. You gotta make sure, you know, when you're down here gasping for air, my rook is gonna get in. Rook d5 is an amazing move. Topalov's entire plan, which seemed very sensible, is just coming back to bite. Now what Topalov has to do is back up. Okay, so now Topalov has no advantage because Magnus has fought back, giving away 2 pawns at the same time and creating counterplay, but the position is equal, right? I mean, you can't win this. Look at this. Knight f4 attacking the rook and the pawn. Take my pawn. Go ahead. Topalov's like, no, I'm good. c5 threatening a pawn fork. c4 defending a pawn fork. Let me attack that. Defending. Now, white is still a little bit better here, right? King to e2. I mean, how on earth is white going to lose this game? Well, first of all, it's blitz, right? Things happen. Players get low on time. Magnus plays e5. Now, the incredible thing about this position is, like, black wants to go here. The only reason black cannot rush with this move is because white could maybe play f3, knight d2, just blockade it. The second Topalov plays this, Magnus plays e5. Now the move f3 will run into certain problems like e4. And now that's a weakness which you did not have a move ago. So the second Topalov sort of plays a mildly absent-minded move, just because he's in low time, here comes e5, e4. And it looks like Topalov set a trap with g4, where if the rook goes back, the pawn is taken. But rook e6, and you defend it, but I kick the defense out from underneath you. And Topalov resigned. Now, the interesting thing here is that Topalov didn't have to resign. I have a feeling he resigned because after king f3, there's gf4 and rook e3. But you can go here and try to do something like this. Now, is Magnus still better here? Unquestionably, and it's sort of an avalanche. But this is the second flavor of position that Magnus is able to beat former world champions in. I mean, look at this position. How does he win this in like 10 moves? It's only he can do that. Only he can somehow, from a long while ago, defend the most unpleasant of positions with active defense, forcing exchanges to get himself back into the game. And moves like rook d4, telling the person where to go, and then rook d5, yelling at them to take the pawn. You really wanted the pawn so bad, so do it, right? Only him, I swear. It's like incredible. I mean, he's just able to win positions that are unwinnable. The game against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So Maxime is a Najdorf player. Magnus sends the game into a super obscure Sicilian defense, all right? Mega sideline, typical Magnus things. This game has a combination of games 1 and 2. The first game, of course, was a different opening. The second game was kind of a grindy end game. Well, the position that we get here is one of opposite colored bishops. So what you're going to see after about 25 moves, opposite colored bishop, dark square versus light squared bishop, and that generally benefits the attacking player, right? Look at these weaknesses. But MVL is one of the best tactical defenders in the world. He removes one of the center pawns, and 5 moves later, the players trade queens, okay? So the players get the queens off the board. Now, if you just take a look around, what is Magnus's best asset in this position? It's the A-pawn, right? Now, black has a pass pawn of his own, actually. But this pawn is very, very strong. And if it ever gets to A7, it'll be a permanent problem. Now, how will Magnus create practical winning chances here? Look at this. Sacrificing a full pawn in the endgame. A full pawn. Black has to take, because if black doesn't take, white goes D6, and white is now completely winning because there are 2 pass pawns to deal with. That is not good at all. But in black taking this pawn, he now has a horrible structure, the worst structure of all time. Every pawn is isolated. 2 of them are on the same file. 5 isolated pawns that don't work together whatsoever. Magnus has a blob. He has one kind of like big island over here, and this pawn is still very good. So now he's going to keep threatening to either infiltrate into MVL's position or create threats against his weaknesses, and in due time, what he's going to do is he's going to bait mistakes, right? Here comes MVL trying to use his B pawn as a decoy to win the A5 pawn. I mean, this looks really nice. But who's guarding, who's going to protect against that pawn? Now Magnus is no longer a pawn down. Rook b6 making the correct exchange. If rook b6 played, this is interesting, but this will probably keep more winning chances alive. And a few moves later, that's exactly what happens. Look at this. Magnus goes correctly threatening a simplification into what might be a winning endgame, because this king will just run to b6, right? It's got a few steps to go, but it's going to go to the b6 square. That's terrifying. This king has to beeline it here as well. So the threat, the constant threat of the correct simplification into the endgame, right, is a major part of his game. Now he's a pawn up. Now he's... Notice how he picked off the B pawn several moves ago. Now he's picking off the D pawn, and black still is a sitting duck with all those weak pawns. Rook d7, another weak pawn right for the taking. MVL's like, I don't want to lose my pawn. Magnus is like, oh my good, g4. If you take like this, there's this. If you take like this, you're going to lose h6, and that's what he does. And now this pawn and this pawn are both runaways. A and H running down the edge of the board, and this is still defendable. Like, you can still defend this position, all right? Stockfish still says that it's within reach, but the constant pressure and the ability to cold-bloodedly calculate that even though your king is suffocating on the back rank, he's completely fine. H5, look at this. H6, the runaway pawn. Now there's 2 pawns, the A and H pawn. And finally, MVL blunders. It takes 60 moves to crack him, but look at this. sacking the bishop with check and going back to the home square because no one is close enough to get to you. And the second that you try to go to e3 and f2, Magnus sees right through it and plays rook to e8. And the idea of rook to e8 is the sacrifice on the bishop, and one of the pawns will promote. I think the best move actually was to make a queen, but they had 5 seconds on the clock. He can be forgiven. h8 queen, and MVL resigned because this is covered by the queen in the corner. Just long-term, constant pressure. It is never, ever over. And this all began like 30 moves ago when Magnus played this move d5, okay? Splitting all of these pawns up. These pawns remained intact, but slowly he won the b pawn. He ended up going around and winning the d pawn. And then he got to the h pawn via tactic, and both pawns went up the board. It's just like, the understanding of the temporary sacrifices, the constant threat of the winning simplifications gets it done. Now, he had to go up against the guy that tried to win his world championship from him as well, right? So Nepo played a super super absurd opening. Like, what is going on here? Look at this. I mean, tactics galore. The craziest thing about this position is that Jan played all of these moves up until this point with black against Fabiano Caruana 5 years ago. This position had been reached with Fabiano Caruana as white and Jan Nepomniachtchi as black. And I don't remember what was played in that game, one of these moves. Bishop h3, which is what Magnus chose in this game, is a novelty. Now, if we just take stock of the opening, black's just down a pawn. The only thing that black has to not be down a pawn is activity. Black has the bishop pair. White obviously has a relatively weakened king on the light squares. Interesting idea here by Jan, giving up the bishop to take a bishop. Magnus is like, no, thank you. And now Magnus grabs back the pawn on b2. Now you're gonna get reminded of the Topalov game here, okay? The Topalov MVL game back all in one, because it's 5 pawns apiece, right? 4 on 3 on this side, 1 on 2. This is really the only difference maker, but that pawn's never gonna be useful. What on earth is that pawn gonna do? Magnus trades the queens. Magnus thinks that, practically speaking, this endgame is better for black if the queens come off the board. Nepo goes for the pawn. Magnus says no. Nepo prepares going for the pawn again, backs up with his rook, and goes for the other pawn. Magnus says no. f3. Now that pawn is moving. All right? h5 is always a good move, kind of like seemingly to prevent anything from moving here. Also just ideas to break up the structure. So now we've kind of figured out what's going to happen over there. Now it's time for the rooks and the knight to dance, okay? Bishop back to e6, king g7, rook d7 trying to go down. That pawn has served its purpose, and now that pawn will be captured. a7 can be taken here, but with what? For example, rook a7, I have this. Oops, 2 rooks hang. You got to choose one of them, right? And knight a7 looks like it can be taken, but now I'm coming down. You should have been real careful over here. All right, my bishop is coming as well. So since that pawn can't be taken, Jan has to ignore it for a while, right? Endgame is constantly hovering around zeros. Oops. He grabs a pawn. Knight c3 stopped rook e2, but this move is an x-ray. And all of a sudden, Magnus just has the a pawn. And we've talked about outside pass pawns before, right? Sustained pressure. So look at this. The check, check, king up, rook back. Covering the entire 7th rank, bishop back. But how are you going to push the pawn? White's got a pretty good blockade, right? Uh-oh. Oh, now this is a problem. The correct simplification again. All right, knight c5, bishop c6, white is paralyzed. White can't move anything. White moves the knight, they might trade rooks. So he starts moving the king, but now king back, king here. And white, it just can't, you notice white has to just move his king around, right? This is another correct decision. Look at him creating the outside pass pawn possibility, which is the same thing that he did against MVL. Look at that. The same way. The same exact way. And Magnus just walks his king in. White is totally paralyzed. Those pieces are stuck in a trance. Rook d2, h3, and that's it. He just resigns. For the last like 15 moves of the game, Jan was unable to move his rook or his knight. He freezes the enemy pieces, and he gets the job done. Just absolutely amazing. All right? 5th game that I have for you. This game and the 7th game of this video, the last game of this video, are when Magnus gets mad. All right? These are games where you try to pipe up. You're like, all right, Magnus, I'm not going to let you get to your sweet spot. And Magnus Carlsen goes full Michael Jordan on you. He takes it personally. So the players here play an imbalanced Neo Grunfeld kind of style game. D takes c4. Mamedyarov played this against Magnus in Norway chess, and after e4, bishop g4, lost a very interesting game, but it was kind of very one-sided. This time he plays b5, and then plays the move bishop a6, which, according to my database, has only been played once in a game between Paravian and Gelfand in like a blitz tournament. And then he plays back to b7, so I guess he was just trying to bait this, and then it looks kind of like a mouselet, but they played this game live. And like I said, this is what happens when Magnus gets mad. e6, knocking on the door. Mamedyarov, you're overdue with your rent. Where you at? Bishop c8, knight g5. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Oh, it's bad. I'm going in. Like, you can invite me in, and I have no way out. I don't need a way out, okay? Knight c3, counterattacking the queen. He just takes back, queen e8, and Magnus is like, wow, look at this pressure I have over here, huh? This knight might die in a couple of moves. So what do I have to do before black is able to kind of consolidate everything? Oh, I know, a4. Smashing on the opposite side of the board. Don't make Magnus mad. And do not, for the love of God, put 6 of your 7 pieces on the back rank against him. He's not going to look back. Magnus with the Catalan bishop, the light squared bishop, is a savage. Bishop e6. Now, rather than taking like this, he gives a check, forces the king out, takes this, and this is coming down as well. And you know what's going to happen when that pawn comes down? This pawn will decide the game. That pawn will decide the game. Magnus will get in here on the files, and unlike the other games, it took Magnus 15 moves in this game to get a completely dominant, one-sided beatdown of a position. Do not play positions against Magnus where he gets long-term positional compensation for just one pawn. Just don't do it. All right, rook a7, d5, the pawns are joining forces. Queen e3 hits the rook. He grabs the pawn. He's now a pawn up along with everything else. And Mamedyarov tries to get some tactics here, but I told you, doesn't matter if it was that c-pawn or the d-pawn that became a c-pawn, the game is over when that pawn moves up 1 square. And finally it does, and Mamedyarov resigns because he can't prevent the catastrophic loss of material here. And I'm just telling you, he just makes it look completely effortless. Like, I'm sitting here like, how does he do this? Like, really? I mean, all Magnus has to do is throw one punch, speak softly and carry a big stick, all right? e6, and it was over. Mamedyarov tried to get a little bit creative here and you just don't get creative against him, all right? He's gonna Gordon Ramsay you, all right? I mean, just I'm telling you, all right? The 6th game that I have for you is the game that he played against Alireza Firouzja. All right, this one was a semi-Slav defense. Queen's Gambit declined semi-Slav defense, and a relatively tame position. All right, not a whole lot happened in this game. In fact, the structure is completely symmetrical from an early point. In this game, you're not seeing Magnus's opening genius. Sorry, what did I say? Opening genius. You're not seeing his opening strategy of taking the game to kind of a unique territory. You're not gonna see his sustained equal position or ability to defend unpleasant position or beat down. This game is what happens when you allow Magnus to be creative and allow him to be a genius, okay? So, first things first, imbalance in the game. All right, some crazy tactics here, rook pressuring this. All right, everything is defending everything else. Alireza really took the fight to Magnus in this game. And the queenside structure is imbalanced, right? Stack versus connected. We have a threat potentially over here. So a3 just prevents b4, knight c5, and the attack has been thwarted on that side of the board, so Magnus plays the move knight a4. The idea of knight a4 is trying to undouble the structure, create a bad structure here for white, and rotate back this way. And keep in mind this rotation idea, because Magnus uses the b-pawn to chip away at that structure, and then rotates the rook behind the pawn. So pawn up, rook behind pawn. Okay, then he defends his rook, and then when Alireza attacks the pawn on b4, because you cannot take on a3 because the knight is hanging, Magnus sacrifices a full piece, just gives away the knight completely, right? He gets a couple of pawns back, so full piece is a bit of an exaggeration, but why? I mean, the queen is hanging and the rook is hanging, but look at this move. Alireza, or this move. Alireza must have seen this and was like, well, I'm just a piece up. Yeah, but Magnus is a genius, right? He used the pawn to break forward, put the rook behind it, and just gave away his knight because he had foreseen that after all of this, nobody can stop the pawn. That pawn's going. Knights are too slow and too clumsy. They trip over each other. Nobody can get over here. So Alireza goes back. Bishop b5 hits the knight. The knight gets defended. And now just a very slow improvement of the position. The knights are too clumsy. I can even trade queens. He picks the right moment to simplify the position. I've been trying to tell you this throughout the video. This is what he does constantly. Now bishop c4, a2. The knight cannot get close, like Chael Sonnen and Vanderlei Silva. And g5 is coming, and b5, b4 is coming. He saw all this. He understood two knights cannot take on rook, bishop, and pawn. A full piece sacrifice to get not a tactical attack on a king, but the pawn will go. Alireza tries to sacrifice a piece and win the pawn back. Folks, we've been here before. He's got the outside passer. It's not an A pawn. All right, it's a B pawn. Bishop versus knight situation. But you know who the hero of this game is going to be? The hero of this game is going to be the king. King to g6. King to f5. King takes e5. And king d4. When it was time, the king was the one who arrived, and the game was decided by this walk. Because now the pawn goes, the king really cannot go here, because this king will go here, and the rest of the pawns will die. Don't allow Magnus to be a genius. And speaking of how he ends things in this video with being a genius, does this position look familiar? I swear we just had this, right? Queen e2, bishop a6. That is exactly what happened in the game between Carlsen and Mamedyarov. Did Shadic not see that game, or was he just like, well, I'm going to play knight a6. I'm going to bring my knight in over here, and I don't care what you did to Mamedyarov. You're not going to do that to me. Good luck. All right, good luck doing that to me. Magnus is like, okay, a4. Let's break up the structure. You're defending the structure, knight to e5. He understands exactly how to apply pressure and exactly the right move to make. In that other game, he played e5, e6, knight g5. This time, he drops the knight in the middle, but black's position is very solid. Right? Wrong. d5. Uh-oh. We're crashing through. Over here, over here, over here. Look at black's position. The crazy thing is, this is still okay for black if you defend correctly. Knight h5 attacks the bishop. Boom. We hit the queen. Boom. You hit the queen back, but I have gf4. You can move out of the way. And just like I shoved my knight in your mouth last time, knight d7. Trapping the rook. If you take, the pawn walks even further and now just stands on your doorstep ready to become a queen. So we have knight d3. Finally, that knight arrives to cut the circulation. But white has another knight. And knight e7 is a winning of a queen, so you have to protect. But now, that queen is stuck defending that side of the board, so a takes b5 continues to bulldoze. A takes b5, I think actually was unnecessary, and I think knight f8 was better. My job here is to hype up Magnus in this video of watching how he does things. But if a better move is available, I will be showing it. I'm not trying to sit here and be like, well, I would have played that move. But knight f8 right now would have actually been the better move. Maybe he thought there was this and this is trapped. But then there is this amazing knight b4, which hits both things. But it's blitz, so a b5. Takes, 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 and the pawn continues to walk. It's been, balance has been restored to the universe. Magnus is a pawn up with another passed pawn. And he ends this in style by prying apart the defenses of black. We have knight c5, queen e3, queen a7. And just another mauling. It took 26 moves, but he's up a full piece at the end of it, and he will be up 9 more points when that pawn goes. Stop taking pawns against Magnus and holding on and allowing him to just pressure you to death. I don't know what to say. So in games 5 and 7, was him getting mad about 3 or 4 times in this video. It was like super smooth endgames. A couple of times, maybe like 3 or 4 times against MVL, Topalov, and Jordan, it was interesting opening battles, and this one is no different. I mean, these Catalan-style positions would just supremely fit his style, where it's like one player against another, not a whole lot of preparation, and he just makes it look easy. Now, he wasn't perfect, all right? On day 2, which finished about an hour ago, he lost a couple of games, but he went on to win. He went on to win the event, slowed down a little bit in the last 2 rounds, but I was just fascinated by the way that he beats other players who are right there, up there in the rankings with him, and I wanted to share it with all of you. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you in the next one. Get out of here.